The female is as it were a mutilated male. Aristotle. They told you women were divine, that their love was salvation, that her touch would soothe your scars, her eyes would see your soul, her heart would hold your chaos like a mother cradling a fevered child. And you believed it. Because how could you not? Every story you heard since boyhood made her the prize, the endgame, the home. And you? The fool who chased, the knight who knelt, the man who molded himself to be chosen. But what if that story was the first lie? What if she isn't your redemption? What if she's your reflection, not of your strength, but of your misunderstanding? You think you're broken because she left. You think you're hollow because she doesn't see you. But the ache you feel isn't about her absence, Incon, it's about your projection. You projected healing. You projected meaning. You made her the shrine where you could finally feel enough. And when she turned away, it wasn't love you lost. It was your illusion. You don't see her. You see the part of yourself that wants to be healed. That's what Carl Jung tried to teach. The anima, the fantasy, the mirror. You didn't want a woman. You wanted wholeness. But you outsourced that wholeness to her affection. You handed her your worth, wrapped in romantic words and desperate smiles. And now you're here, staring at the ruins, not of a relationship, but of the man you pretended to be in her presence. You didn't lose her. You lost the mask, the one you wore to be loved, the one you clung to so tightly, you forgot the face underneath. And that's the real pain. Not heartbreak, not betrayal, but exposure. The sudden silence that follows when the performance ends, and all you hear is your own emptiness echoing back. You were taught to chase softness, to kneel for nurture, to sacrifice strength for sweetness. But what if love, the kind you were trained to believe in, was never mutual? What if it was just hierarchy wrapped in poetry? You became obedient for approval, performative for affection, powerless for connection. And now you wonder why you feel hollow. It's not because she stopped loving you. It's because she stopped feeding the illusion. And without the illusion, you're left with the truth. That you were never whole. That your love was not an offering. It was a bargain. You traded your selfhood for the feeling of being chosen. And the worst part? She didn't even ask you to. If you've ever caught yourself performing, just to feel worthy of love, leave a single dot below. Let your silence speak for you. Let your truth start here. Because the tragedy isn't that she left. The tragedy is that you agreed to perform, just to not be left. She's not the answer. She's the mirror. She doesn't see you. She sees the man her mind made up, a fantasy stitched from childhood dreams and curated expectations. And you played along because you wanted to be chosen. You wanted to matter. But what if the woman you love isn't seeing you at all? What if she's only loving her projection? Aristotle never romanticized the feminine. He stripped away the myths. He said, form, function, deviation, not poetry, not salvation, not hate, just clarity. You saw softness. She saw strategy. You saw devotion. She saw design. Because when survival is shaped by the dominant form, adaptation becomes instinct. And when the masculine rules the system, the feminine learns to become its reflection, not out of weakness, but necessity. That's what you missed. She didn't need to lie to you. You lied to yourself. And she simply became the lie you were already addicted to. You thought she loved you. No. She loved the role you played. The protector, the giver, the emotionally literate man who knew how to kneel. But she was never in love with your truth. She was in love with your utility. And when you stopped performing, she stopped responding. You say she betrayed you. That's not true. She betrayed the character you stopped playing. She doesn't grieve the real you. She grieves the illusion, the fantasy, the projection. But so do you. Because now that it's gone, now that the pedestal has cracked, all that's left is silence. The kind of silence you can't fix with gifts or words or effort. The silence of no longer being seen through a delusion. You never knew her, Not really. You only knew the mask she wore to match the mask you performed. And this is why you feel insane. Because you were both lying, politely, lovingly, hoping the illusion could become real if you just believed hard enough. You saw a muse. She saw a pattern. You saw vulnerability. She saw leverage. You thought the way she touched you was love. It wasn't. It was calibration. She's not soft. She's shape-shifting. She's not nurturing. She's observing. She listens like a mirror. She speaks like a script. She adapts like a weapon. And yet you worshipped it because you mistook reflection for depth. The tragedy isn't that she manipulated you. It's that you needed her to. You didn't fall for her. You fell for the part of you she reflected, the wounded boy who just wanted to be told he was enough. But here's the truth. She doesn't want to dominate you. She wants to become essential. The thought in your head before you act, the ache in your gut when she's distant, the measure you use to value yourself, and she knows this. That's her power. She doesn't rule by force. She rules by becoming the very air you breathe. You call it chemistry. She calls it control. And when she withdraws, when the echo fades, you don't miss her. You miss who you were allowed to be when she approved of you. You never loved her. You loved the reflection she gave you. She doesn't have to take anything from you, because you gave it, your identity, your pride, your silence. And when she no longer needs you, she won't rage, she won't weep. She will simply stop playing the character you wrote for her, and you will say she changed, but she didn't. She just stopped pretending, she stopped projecting, and now you have to face the rawest truth of all. You weren't rejected. You were replaced. Not by another man, but by the absence of illusion. You see now, she didn't break your heart, she broke your mirror. You weren't betrayed. You abandoned yourself first. Long before she turned cold, long before she withdrew, you were already kneeling. Not in devotion, but in self-erasure. You apologized for things that weren't wrong. You softened your tone, censored your truth, bent your edges. You did everything you could to be kept, but every act of performance cost you something essential. You weren't loving her. You were bargaining with your own masculinity. She didn't ask you to shrink. You offered it, just for the illusion of closeness. And that is the deepest betrayal. Not hers, yours. Because you stopped being a man the moment you needed her permission to exist as one. You didn't fight for truth. You fought to maintain access. You fought to keep being useful. You fought not to be seen, but to not be left. That is not love. That is fear dressed in poetry. You think she disrespected you? She didn't. She simply mirrored your self-surrender. Women don't follow men who seek permission. They follow men who walk without apology. But you kept waiting for approval. You kept asking silently, "Am I enough now?" And every time she sensed that, she didn't feel love. She felt leverage, because when you handed her your spine, you didn't give her something to cherish. You gave her something to rearrange. You didn't want connection. You wanted validation. And you thought that if you gave more, she would finally see you. But love doesn't bloom from neediness, it withers. You became her emotional supplier, not because she demanded it, but because you made her the judge of your worth. You bent, you yielded, you played the part of the emotionally available man, but only because you feared that your raw self might be too much. But what's the cost of hiding? Every time you flinch away from your truth, you teach her to flinch away from your presence. She can't respect a man who won't defend himself, not from her, but from his own doubt. And so she tests you, not maliciously, instinctively. She pokes at your center to see if it holds, and when it doesn't, she pulls back. Not because she's cruel, but because her biology doesn't follow broken men. It adapts around them. You keep saying she changed, but no, she adjusted. To your collapse. Because here's the truth no one wants to say. When a man forfeits his sense of self for approval, he ceases to be a man in her eyes. He becomes a tool, a resource, a reflection, not a partner. You gave her your identity, piece by piece. Call it vulnerability. Call it emotional intelligence. But she saw it for what it was. A man trying to be chosen, not a man choosing himself. And when you operate from that place, every kiss, every touch, every gesture is not an act of intimacy. It's an act of performance. And now you're angry, not because she used you, but because you used yourself. To feel loved, to feel safe, to avoid the work of standing alone, of being whole without her, of facing the silence you've spent your life avoiding. So hear this, brother. You don't need her forgiveness. You need your own. You need to stop apologizing for your existence. Stop begging for redemption in someone else's eyes. Because the man who kneels for love will never rise in respect. And no woman, no matter how tender, can truly love a man who doesn't know how to hold his own line. You don't need to be approved. You need to be true. Let her test. Let her walk. But never again betray the man inside just to stay close to someone who only ever loved your performance. You don't need to be chosen. You need to choose yourself for the first time, without performance, without apology, because you've spent your life chasing mirrors, chasing approval, chasing a version of yourself that felt lovable enough. But what happens when the mirrors break? What remains when the reflection is gone? Silence, not emptiness, but space. The space where your selfhood can finally breathe without being edited. This is individuation. Not the gaining of power, but the returning to center. To choose not based on her gaze, but based on your gravity. To stand, alone, and still feel whole. You think she abandoned you? She didn't. She exited the stage when you stopped playing the part. And in that moment, when the curtain dropped, you weren't destroyed. You were revealed. You didn't lose her. You lost the script. The story where your worth was written by her attention. The myth that her presence made you real. That was never love. That was illusion. You spent years folding yourself into versions. Versions that wouldn't scare her. Versions that wouldn't challenge her. Versions that could be kept. But now, you face the void. And the void asks a simple question. Who are you when no one is watching? Not the man who flinches, not the man who edits, but the man who remains. Even when she leaves, even when she tests, even when her silence screams that you are alone. That's not punishment, that's purification. You are not weak because you feel pain. You are strong because you stayed standing in it. And yes, it's lonely, but it's not despair. It's detox. Detox from the myth. Detox from the projection. Detox from the need to be needed. This is where men are born. Not in triumph, but in rejection. Not in love, but in loss. Because real masculinity doesn't emerge from being wanted. It emerges from walking away when your soul is at stake. She said you were too much? Good. Be too much for the lie. Be too much for the role. Be too much for the cage. Because a man who is sovereign will always be too much for someone who needs him small. This is not ego. This is essence. You don't owe her understanding. You owe yourself integrity. You don't need her to stay. You need to stay with yourself. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not bitter. You're boundaried. You're not alone. You're unmasked. And yes, she might walk. Let her. Because the woman who needs you to shrink was never strong enough to stand beside the real you. Let the fantasy burn. Let the stage collapse. Let the silence rebuild your spine. You're not grieving her. You're shedding the part of you that thought you needed saving. You don't. You need truth. And here it is. She doesn't complete you. She never did. She reflected your incompletion. She mirrored your hunger. She played the echo. But the voice? That's yours. Find it again. Hold it again. Speak it, even if it trembles, because this is how you become the man who doesn't chase, the man who doesn't perform, the man who doesn't flinch. You are no longer in orbit. You are no longer in rehearsal. You are here. You are whole. And that is enough. She's not manipulative because when she's not the center of power, she learns to master its edges, but through precision, but always strategic. She's not chasing romance. She's calibrating control, not because she's evil, but because her survival depends on it. You built the systems. She built the silence, the masculine principle inside the female psyche, the internalized voice of power, not just what she desires, but what she becomes to navigate your world. She mirrors your strength, not to honor it, but to contain it. She studies your rhythm, your tone, your patterns, but because that's how she becomes indispensable, with comprehension. Her power isn't in being seen. She's decoding. She listens for leverage, because survival isn't cruelty. It's calculation. She doesn't seduce to win. She becomes necessary to survive. You thought she was waiting for you. She was watching you. Every time you opened up, she memorized your blueprint. Not to exploit it, to own it. Not because she's malicious, because that's what she was shaped to do. You call her feminine. She's strategic. You call her emotional. She's surgical. She's been trained, not by books, but by generations of watching the men who had power. You gave her the map. She traced it. You gave her your pattern. She weaved it into choreography. Why she can push buttons you didn't even know you had. It's not magic. She knows the grammar of your heart better than you do. And she edits you, slowly, carefully, until you're speaking her script without realizing you forgot your own. This isn't possession, it's persuasion, elevated into instinct. She doesn't want your body. She wants your frame, your center, your direction. Because if she can occupy your mind, your strength becomes hers to redirect. And you let her. Because you thought love meant surrender. It doesn't. But you didn't want clarity. You wanted comfort. You call it intimacy. What you have isn't love. It's choreography. No. She just stopped dancing. She doesn't need to attack you. She needs to reflect you. Until you dissolve into a version she can manage. And when your usefulness ends, when your structure falters, when you reclaim your voice, she withdraws. Not out of pain, out of strategy. Because without leverage, she has no intimacy. And without your surrender, she has no script. So she moves on. Not because she hates you, because you're no longer functional. And that's the brutal truth. You weren't her lover. You were her leverage. And you call that love? No. That was negotiation. That was projection. That was obedience masquerading as romance. You didn't lose a woman. You lost the version of yourself that needed to be shaped. And now, all that's left is the man who finally sees. You are no longer a project. Not the edited version. Not the agreeable, adaptable, always available echo of her expectation. You are the man who stayed standing, not because it didn't hurt. You are sovereign. You no longer chase approval. You no longer shrink to be kept. You no longer confuse silence with connection. Because now you see it for what it was. Not love, leverage, not intimacy, choreography, not closeness, captivity. And you're done dancing. You don't need to be loved for being agreeable. You don't need to be desired for being soft. You don't need to be chosen for playing safe. You don't need to be understood. You need to be true. She may not like it. She may pull back. She may test. Let her. Because the moment you stop orbiting, the gravity shifts. She will feel it. She will feel the center you reclaimed. And she will either rise to meet you or fall away. But either way, you stay centered. This is the sovereign man. He doesn't chase validation. He embodies clarity. He doesn't explode in anger. He moves with stillness. He doesn't need to dominate. He doesn't need to perform. He simply is. And in that presence, all illusions burn. She cannot manipulate what doesn't flinch. She cannot shame what holds no guilt. She cannot mold what has nothing to prove. You thought strength was force. Now you know. True strength is restraint. True power is stillness. True masculinity is self-sufficiency. And she will notice. Not because you shout. Because you no longer seek. You don't ask for her attention. You don't beg for her softness. You don't perform to be wanted. You don't need her to love you. You choose whether her love is aligned. And that is when respect enters. She doesn't leave strong men. She can't. Not because he overpowers her, because he doesn't depend on her. He is untouchable by manipulation, unshakable by moods, unmoved by threats. Because he's already whole. You're no longer trying to prove yourself to her. You're proving something to yourself, that you can exist without shrinking, without bargaining, without kneeling. You stand, with your voice, with your values, with your edges. And if she walks, she walks. But what stays? Your center. And when that becomes your new home, the game ends. No more pedestal, no more role play, no more emotional negotiations. You no longer need her to define you. You've already chosen you. And in that sovereign silence, something rare begins. Connection without control, love without leverage, intimacy without dependency. And finally, not because you needed her, and that you didn't lose love. You lost the illusion that love could fix you. She didn't leave. She stepped away from the role you cast her in. The muse, the redeemer, the missing piece. You weren't grieving her. You were grieving the man you performed to be in her presence. That man, the agreeable, self-sacrificing, emotionally obedient mask, he was never real. He was created in the hope that someone would see him and say, "You're enough." But she never said it. Not because she was cruel, because she was watching, reading, measuring. And when she saw that your identity was built on her gaze, she used it. Not maliciously, instinctively. Because when a man has no core, he becomes a tool in her world. She didn't destroy you. She revealed you. She didn't hurt you. She unmasked you. And now you stand, in the aftermath of your own delusion. No more pedestal, no more script, no more desperate performance, just truth. Unedited, unfiltered, uncomfortable, but real. And in that silence, a new voice starts to rise. Not hers, not society's, but yours. The man who doesn't chase illusions, the man who doesn't beg for affection, the man who doesn't fold himself for warmth. You were never meant to be completed by her. You were meant to face the hollow place you tried to fill with her approval and make peace with it. That space, that terrifying, quiet, unlit place, is the birthplace of sovereignty. So let the myth burn. Let the fantasy collapse. Let the old story drown in its own sentimentality. Because only in that ash can something honest rise. You, unfiltered, unimpressed, unmoved by performance. Hers or yours. You no longer need her to be pure. You no longer need her to be soft. You no longer need her to be anything but real. And when you meet her from that place, not as a savior or a solution, but as a mirror of difference, something radical becomes possible. Connection, without control, love, without leverage, intimacy, without performance. But only if you're willing to let go of the dream that she was ever supposed to save you. She wasn't. She was only ever meant to reflect what you had not yet faced. So face it. And if these words shattered something false, don't hide it. Share this. Pass it to a brother still kneeling in silence. Let this be a torch. In a world that sells illusions, let this be the first crack of light.